When Union troops marched toward Virginia for the first major battle of the Civil War, the mood in the North was festive. Spectators from Washington, D.C. actually rode out in carriages with picnic baskets, expecting a quick, bloodless victory. That optimism evaporated when the two armies collided at Bull Run. The fighting devolved into chaos, breaking the Union line. The resulting retreat was so disorganized that panicked soldiers crashed into the civilian carriages as everyone scrambled to escape the battlefield. Desperate for stability, the North handed command to General George McClellan. He was a brilliant organizer, but he suffered from a specific psychological trait. He hated taking risks. If the weather wasn't ideal or the odds weren't overwhelmingly in his favor, he refused to engage. The Union approached the early days of the conflict trying to maintain a high degree of control. They attempted to treat combat like a chess match, avoiding the heavy casualties required to secure a victory. That hesitation left them vulnerable against an enemy fighting for its existence. You can see the cost of that hesitation during the Peninsula Campaign. McClellan marched toward the Confederate capital of Richmond with a massive numerical advantage, but he moved so slowly that his forces lost the element of surprise. That delay gave the newly appointed Confederate commander, Robert E. Lee, an opening. Lee ignored the odds and went straight on the attack. He hammered the Union forces through swamps and dense forests, inflicting heavy losses and forcing a full-scale retreat. Watching his generals retreat, President Abraham Lincoln recognized a harsh reality. Polite military maneuvering was losing the United States the war. The Union needed a commander willing to match the brutal reality of the conflict. That commander arrived in the form of Ulysses S. Grant. He was the antithesis to McClellan. When a trapped Confederate commander asked for terms of surrender early in the war, Grant simply replied, "No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted." At the Battle of Shiloh, a surprise Confederate attack buckled the Union lines. Most commanders would have ordered a retreat. Grant instead waited for reinforcements and launched a counterattack at sunrise, driving the Southern forces from the field. Grant was also willing to take high-stakes tactical risks. At Vicksburg, the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, he sent Union gunboats right past the city's heavy cannons under the cover of night. The boats slid right past the batteries, allowing him to tighten his grip on the city. This chart shows the strategy Grant used in the East: attrition. He realized the Union had a deep pool of replacement troops. He could absorb heavy losses, replace his fallen men, and keep marching south, refusing to give Lee's army time to recover. The Confederacy couldn't. Every time Lee lost a soldier, that man was gone for good. The Northern press labeled Grant the Butcher for the thousands of lives lost in Virginia. Yet Lincoln refused to remove him, stating, "I can't spare this man. He fights." Grant changed the Union strategy from outmaneuvering the enemy to systematically grinding their army down through sheer bloody math. In the West, Grant handed command to General William T. Sherman. Sherman believed that defeating soldiers on a battlefield wasn't enough if the civilian population still had the resources to support them. To win, the Union had to break the Southern economy. This strategy is known as total war. After capturing Atlanta, Sherman proposed a radical move. He marched his army straight across Georgia toward the sea, intentionally cutting his own supply lines so his soldiers would have to live entirely off the land. His 60,000 soldiers moved in a path of destruction 60 miles wide. They tore up railroad tracks, they torched factories, and liberated thousands of enslaved people, instantly stripping the South of the workforce that powered its economy. By erasing the boundary between combatants and civilian infrastructure, total war turned the Union Army into a threat the Confederacy could not survive. Grant and Sherman's strategies converged at Petersburg, Virginia. For 9 months, Lee's army was pinned down in trenches. Cut off from supply lines and heavily outnumbered, the Confederate soldiers were left starving and trapped. When the lines finally broke, the Confederate capital of Richmond fell. In a final act of desperation, fleeing officials set fire to their own warehouses to keep supplies from the Union. The flames grew out of control, burning much of the city to the ground. Trapped and out of options, Lee met Grant at Appomattox Courthouse to surrender. Grant arrived in a mud-stained uniform, looking like a soldier who hadn't slept. while Lee wore his finest dress uniform with polished buttons. The tactics adopted by Grant and Sherman were controversial, but they achieved what cautious maneuvering could not. By moving past the constraints of 19th century warfare, they managed to preserve the Union and end the institution of slavery. The cost was higher than any other conflict in American history, with over 600,000 dead. The Civil War ended with the United States surviving as a single unified nation, but that survival was bought with a massive human bill that redefined the country's future. If you want to explore more stories from history, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and let me know in the comments what we should